Wow, this house is cute. But can I really get in the game in this economy? I do have savings, and I am responsible-ish. Ugh, I should bury it. I'm being wild. But what if I'm not being wild, though? Could I actually score a...
Kick off your home buying journey with Zillow's new BuyAbility tool. It makes it easy to find out what you can afford, so you can get off the bench and onto the playing field with confidence. Check your BuyAbility, only on Zillow.
This Steve Jones Show podcast is now loading. The Steve Jones Show podcast is presented by Sunbury Motor Company, Purdy Insurance, and Brewers Outlet. Bringing you an in-depth look at Penn State sports and more. This is the Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. The Steve Jones Show is presented by Sunbury Motor Company, Purdy Insurance, and Brewers Outlet. Now from the Sunbury Motor Studio, here's Steve Jones.
And happy Monday to you. Great to be with you. And it's going to get warm. So, this half hour brought to you by Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury. Sunbury Motors, Kia, routes 11 and 15, Hummels Wharf, and online at sunburymotors.com. Ford, Kia, Hyundai, best in new inventory. Great pre-owned inventory with the Sunbury Motors guarantee, which means a lot to your buying experience. And a terrific service department. John, how are you today? Great to have you with us.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm just great. How are you? Hi from Pittsburgh.
John, I want to. It's interesting. I watched. I didn't get to the games. I was on the road. Penn State baseball just beat Indiana 2 out of 3, and Earl Weaver would have loved it because there was there were 3-run homers all over the place in this thing. When putting this together, what did you learn?
So I think it's interesting that people still associate his name with the 3-run homer. I mean, one of the reasons for doing the book is that he has this legendary kind of persona that lives on through fights with umpires, and again, basically naming the 3-run homers after him. I learned a lot. I mean, Earl Weaver is somebody who is famous in baseball history, so I didn't want to do the book unless I was going to add some new material, add some storytelling that was not known previously. So I learned that he was a much better player than people ever realized. He was a true Major League prospect. He just missed the Major Leagues. He was also reared in large part by an uncle who was in the mob. His uncle Bud was a bookie who ran sports gambling around St. Louis. So all that stuff about analytics, I mean, he kind of learned it from gambling from his uncle who was, again, running sports books in St. Louis in the 1930s and 40s.
That's amazing. That's amazing. The one guy that he appeared to have a contentious relationship at the time was Jim Palmer. All right? And now, the Palmer had, look, if I had his talent, I wouldn't want to come out of the games either. Okay?
Yeah.
but what was that like?
I mean, they were the classic odd couple. I mean, Jim was tall and handsome. Earl was short and, shall we say, not handsome. Earl drank like a fish. Jim didn't drink at all. But their duality made for a winning pair. I mean, Earl won the most games of any manager in baseball in the 70s, and Jim won the most games of any pitcher in the American League. And they challenged each other. I mean, Earl knew how to press Jim's buttons, knew how to get him just angry enough to pitch hard and try hard. And Jim even credited him for making the Hall of Fame as a pitcher. And
right.
Like a married couple that could never stay happy, they would just fight all the time. Even when things were going well, they would fight. And their arguments and fights were part of the show of the game, the pageantry of the game. And Jim even wrote a book about it called Together We Were 11 Feet 9.
Oh, goodness. What was, for him, the joy of managing, and what was the pain of managing?
Well, he really wanted to be a player. That was his dream. So he never said, I mean, I think he often said managing was hard work for him. He didn't always enjoy it, partly because he had to do what people did to him, which is break the hearts of players when they had to be demoted to the minor leagues.
Yeah.
I mean, he let Brooks Robinson hang on for 2 seasons after Brooks was past his playing days, just because he couldn't bear to break his heart. And so that sensitivity made managing very hard for Earl Weaver. He enjoyed the winning and the success. I mean, he was on top of the baseball world for a very long time, and on top of the American sports world back when baseball was a much bigger sport in the culture than it is today. He was a very famous American in the 70s. I mean, people knew his name even if they weren't baseball fans, and that's why his name lives on. So he enjoyed all that success, but he found the breaking of players' hearts very hard to handle. It's partly why he walked away from the game at the age of 52.
It's interesting you say that because my brother owns his own business, and he says the hardest thing for him and why he has not, hasn't hired many people is because early when he owned it, he had to lay off a couple people. He said it just was impossible for him to do. I mean,
and Earl was he was a working class guy who very much understood the position of the worker and the boss, and he wanted to do a good job, but he also was put in this position of authority. So when he joined the Orioles as a manager, he said his nickname was the Hatchet because he was in charge of getting rid of the players who weren't good enough, and he was such a good talent evaluator. It's what allowed him to get the guys who were good.
See that when you get the nickname the Hatchet, that's not good. What is there any managerial decision he made that he regretted more than anything else?
I think he understood the probabilities well enough that he understood that the decision might have gone the other way, and the other 2 out of 3 times. But there are 2 decisions I found very interesting, and for people in Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh, where I live, this is relevant. So in the '71 World Series, they were playing the Pirates in Game 7. It was 3-3, chance to win the World Championship. And there was runners on first and second. The Orioles were losing 2-0. First and second, nobody out in the 8th inning. And Earl chose to bunt. So this is a manager who's famous for not bunting. We chose to bunt. The bunt was successful. Then you had second and third, 1 out. And then there were 2 ground balls that scored 1 run. And the second ground ball was the end of the inning. So they lose 2-1. Now, if he had not bunted, he would have increased the chance of having, say, a 3-run homer and winning the game. So a manager who was famous for not bunting, bunted and lost the Game 7 World Series to the Pirates. Now, 8 years later, again against the Pirates, he chose John Lowenstein, same situation. He had John Lowenstein swing away, first and second, nobody out. And what happens? John Lowenstein hits into a double play, and the Orioles lose. So he was damned if he did damned if he didn't there, and the Orioles again lost those 2 close Game 7 series to the Pirates.
What about Earl Weaver away from the game? What was he like?
Well, I don't think he was a very easy person to be with. He was married twice. For his kids, he was often, not home. That was something else that he regretted. He was on the road all the time. And when he walked away at the age of 52, he said, "Just once in my life, I would like to watch the sun go down without watching it set behind the left field bleachers." I mean, this is somebody whose baseball was his whole life from the time he was 4 years old until the time he was 52. So the book's also about what happens to a human life when it gets consumed by one thing and the damage that could do. I mean, he had a real problem with alcohol. He was a chain smoker. I mean, amazingly lived to the age of 82. But yeah, he was somebody who had a temper and was not an easy person to be with. But again, he was also a man of variety. I mean, he gardened. He loved to garden. He loved poodles. He was a very curious mind. He could quote Shakespeare. So this is a complicated person. I think that's what makes him a great character, is that he was always changing, always evolving, and there was a lot of darkness with the light. And I explore the darkness in the book.
Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting part. Sometimes when you're the manager, you're alone. I mean, you can talk about your coaching staff all you want, but the bottom line is you're alone. Is that part of the darkness of Earl Weaver, that he had a job where essentially he was alone even though he was surrounded by people?
That's exactly the right frame. And, Bill James, the baseball writer, said that 18 of the top 25 managers of all time were alcoholics. And as I write in the book, heavy is the head that makes the lineup. I mean, that's a lot of pressure, and it's a lot to deal with. And everybody's blaming you. And, Earl Weaver said, you can't ever forget that if there's 30,000 people in the stands, 15,000 think you're a moron. And that's a lot of mental stress and pressure to deal with. And, yeah, a lot of the guys don't handle it well.
He may have underestimated the moron number. especially, I don't know how Earl would have handled the gambling world, because there's more criticism in the gambling world these days compared to the old days.
I mean, he was in touch with the gambling world. I did not find any evidence that he ever bet on baseball during his career, but he talked like a bookmaker, and he would say things after the game like, "That game was like the time that I bet on two dogs, and they bit each other."
Oh.
And he knew about the odds. He would talk about the Vegas odds, and for writers, he would give them secret tips about who to bet on. And he loved a good wager. He was, again, part of this working class street culture from St. Louis in the 30s.
Wow. What was it about his upbringing? I mean, something that shapes your life. So how did his upbringing shape his life?
I mean, again, this is a guy, a working class guy from a family of hustlers. His dad was owned cleaning businesses and was in charge of the laundry for the St. Louis Cardinals in the 1930s. So this was the team that had Dizzy Dean and all these great characters they had their own cowboy country band. Dizzy had these incredible one-liners, like when he married this party girl, and the sports writer said, that your fiance has been with most of the men in town, and Dizzy said, "Well, I know that I'm one of them, and that's why I'm going to marry her." And so he had this gift for the one-liner, and Earl grew up around that kind of baseball as a carnival, and he learned about the show of baseball. And again, this is St. Louis in the 30s, so it's before the suburbs, so it's crowded streets and taverns and groceries and barbershops, and he's walking to school, he's walking to the ball game, and the Cardinals, the Sportsman's Park then had two Major League Baseball teams, so Earl could see Major League Baseball, the Cardinals in the National League and the Browns in the American League. He could see Major League Baseball every day between April and September, and so he just grew up in a culture saturated with baseball.
Yet he ends up managing essentially the Browns. They became the Orioles.
Exactly. So they moved. The Browns moved to Baltimore in '53, and they had been a failure as a franchise, and they then turned it around and became one of the most successful franchises in baseball history in the '70s, thanks in large part to not just to Earl, but all these guys from St. Louis, like Jim McLaughlin. And they hired Paul Richards, and they created this team that went to the World Series 6 times in 17 seasons and won 3 of them.
Let me ask you about 1969. 1969, the Orioles aren't good. They're great, and they don't have Pat Dobson yet, but they've got McNally, they've got Palmer, they've got Mike Cuellar, they've got Frank and Brooks Robinson, and they play the Mets, and won the first game. Beat Seaver in the first game 4-1 in Baltimore. Don Buford, I think, led off with a homer in the bottom of the first inning, and it set the tone for the whole thing. And then they lost it. What did Earl ever say about that, and did it affect him in any way? Because obviously they came back the next year and won it.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy who was in the Bush Leagues for 20 years before that, so he was pretty happy to be there. And again, he had a good enough understanding of the probabilities involved in baseball to know that losing a 7-game series is a lot of luck, and a lot of if you lose, it's a lot of bad luck. And he also, he coined one of the greatest sayings in baseball history. I saw it when I was at the Hall of Fame doing my research for this book, and he said, this is not like football where you can just run out the clock. You have to give the other man his chance. And he said that after the 5th game the Orioles lost, and it's this level of philosophical wisdom that's still being quoted in the 21st century. And so, again, he had the big picture perspective of knowing that sometimes the odds don't go your way.
Yeah, it was also what happened, and the word historic is overused today and misused in some ways, but the Mets winning was historic. It was. Who the heck? The Cubs had to feel awful because the Cubs had a 9-game lead in August. I'm sorry, and they ended up winning the doggone thing. In retirement, did he mellow in retirement? Because he spent 29 years in retirement. Did he mellow?
Not so much. In Baltimore, people got used to him coming to the banquets and drinking 3 whiskey sours and getting up on stage and delivering a pitch perfect presentation, and then coming back off the stage and being a little messy. So he did kind of wear it as welcome a little bit in Baltimore, but he also had he mellowed. He reconciled with his son Mike, who had been through a rough time, and like all of us, he was a complicated guy, and there was some brightness towards the end, but there was also a lot of kind of old man crankiness, and he never really kicked the drinking.
Oh my goodness! Why did you pick Earl Weaver? So what's your connection here? Why did you pick him? I think he's a fascinating subject, but, you have to have your reasons as to why.
He is a transformative figure in baseball history who's in the book Moneyball. He's in all these famous books about analytics, and nobody had properly examined his legacy. Nobody had looked at where he came from. Nobody had looked at how his ideas were formed. He was the first manager to use a radar gun. He was the first manager to use data in the dugout, and nobody had ever sort of figured out why. So that was the impetus. And I'm an Orioles fan. I grew up overseas in Belgium, but I would go to Baltimore sometimes in the summers and see Orioles games. And I played college baseball at Mount St. Mary's in Maryland, and I coached in my 20s. And I coach high school baseball now at Alderdice High School in Pittsburgh. And I'm fascinated by the baseball part of the story of why he was such a good manager. And one of the big thrills for me was in the archives of the Hall of Fame was finding the Oriole Way document. So it's like a 100-page playbook about how the Orioles figured out the best way to play baseball. So for me, it was really the baseball and explaining why he was so successful.
Was Don Stanhouse the best way to play baseball?
Don Stanhouse, he called me with maybe 3 or 4 whiskey sours in himself, and he said, anybody with the balls to write a book about Earl is somebody I should talk to.
What was the nickname? Full Pack?
Nickname Full Pack because Earl would smoke a full pack of cigarettes watching close the game because he would not throw strikes and he would drive everybody crazy, most of all his manager.
So, yet he'd load the bases and he'd get out of it. It's like, okay. I remember him pitching. Like, you'd sit there and go, really? They went with this guy?
Yeah. But he somehow, Earl liked the wild guys. That was part of his secret sauce, was he could tolerate extreme personalities and eccentrics.
Finally, about this, what did you find redeeming in all of this?
His capacity for evolution. He titled his memoir, and he even hung this in the clubhouse when he started. It's what you learn after you know it all that counts. And there was a capacity he had for all his messiness. He grew up for example, in a very racially charged environment in St. Louis, and used racial slurs. And when he got to the major leagues, one of the first things he did was promote a black player, Don Buford, and he helped Frank Robinson become baseball's first black manager. And in his book, he even says, I evolved. Like I grew up with these beliefs that other people were inferior. When I got to the major leagues, I realized that people are just people, and so he had this capacity to change. When women arrived in the clubhouse as reporters, he didn't handle it well at all. And again, he evolved. He bunted a lot his first few years of his career, and towards the end, embraced the 3-run homer. So he was always reassessing things and changing. And I think that's a very redeeming quality.
Redeeming qualities always have the ability to say to yourself, okay, quote, what's best practice? And it sounds to me like Earl Weaver figured out through life what best practice was.
And not from imitating other people always either. He dared to do things like when the radar gun came along, he was the first manager to raise his hand and say, "Oh yeah, sure, I'll use that." Yeah.
Well, it turned out everybody started copying him.
That's right. Yeah.
That's what they did. They copied him. So where can we get this book?
Books available since last Tuesday. At your local bookstore. Try to support local bookstores. Otherwise, bookshop.org or Amazon have it. All the big sellers. The audiobook is fantastic with an actor named Johnny Heller. Love the audiobook. It's available on Spotify too. You can get it on Spotify. So it's a mainstream book, so you can find it anywhere pretty much.
Yeah, some driving distances, audiobooks are great. So, with all due respect. All right. Hey, did you read it? Yeah. It may have been the audiobook, but I read it. Hey, John, thanks so much for your time. Sounds like a great, great piece of work on a fascinating topic.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
You bet. Come back. More in a moment here on News Radio 1070 WKOK, brought to you by Sunbury Motors.
Party time, game time, or just fun time. Doesn't matter what time it is because it's Brewers Outlet time. The beverage supermarket has the area's largest beer selection, imports, microbrews, ciders, and domestics. Pick from over 100 ice-cold 12-packs and dozens of 24-ounce singles. Soda, snacks, hot sauces, fresh roasted peanuts. Make it one-stop party shopping, and don't forget the pickle bar. So whatever you're celebrating or just doing it up, Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street, Sunbury wants to see you. And thank you for your years of patronage.
Hi, this is Season. For over 100 years, the Purdy Insurance Agency has been protecting families and businesses of the greater Susquehanna Valley and beyond. With the experience of our trained and knowledgeable staff, you can rest assured that your needs will be evaluated and met by some of the industry's best representatives. No matter what your insurance needs are, call Purdy Insurance today at 570-286-5855. Visit our website at purdyinsurance.com or check us out on Facebook to see what we can do for you.